From our understandings of schema, we know that pre-existing information can influence how we encode information into our long-term memory and also how we recall it from our long-term. This in itself suggests that most memories that we create are not necessarily like snapshots of the event, and that two people who are exposed to that same environment or same event can encode that memory quite differently. Okay? In your activity, each of your groups explored several factors that may influence the reliability of memory in your efforts to create a strong defense to support your wrongly accused clients. It is safe then to say that there are more factors that suggest that memory is unreliable than there are that suggest that memory is reliable. Okay? So Elizabeth Loftus has been a researcher who has been on the front line of a lot of research and studying the reliability of memory. She's conducted several researches to investigate different aspects of why memory may not be reliable. She's also been at the receiving end, because of her research, of a lot of criticism from psychotherapists, other researchers, law enforcement, because a lot of what she found was quite atypical of what was known of memory at that time. Okay, and she has also been a strong or major part of what we know as the memory wars, and it's been a back and forth on whether memory is reliable, whether there are false memories, and the reconstructive process. So there has been an ongoing war between several psychologists who have different perspectives on the reliability of memory, and she has worked really hard to basically show or suggest that memory is not necessarily as we think it was. It is not a snapshot. It is not a videotape of the whole situation. Okay. So in this video, I'll be going over 3 studies that that are from the list that I gave you last class. These are quite pivotal researches that would be good to use in your answers. So I will be going over them and going over a few evaluative points of them as well. So the biggest argument in understanding that reliability of memory is that there is increasing evidence that memory can be distorted. Okay? In other words, retrieving information from our long-term memory is an active process, which involves reconstruction of our original memory. And reconstruction is basically constructing again what was already encoded into our memory. And this can be then influenced by several factors such as post-event information or misinformation, the context in which it is being retrieved, the emotions involved, and several other factors included. Okay? So the first study that I will be going over is Loftus and Palmer's 1974 experiment. For those of you who were a part of the current DP2's IA last year, you might have experienced or have some recollection of this procedure. Okay? So the researchers aimed to investigate whether the use of leading words or leading questions would affect eyewitnesses' testimony, or rather the estimation of their speed, which would be an indication of whether memory is reliable or not. Okay, so for the purpose of this research, 45 students were divided into 5 different groups, and each group was asked to watch 7 short films of traffic accidents. So basically car accidents that were videotaped and were shown on a screen to the participants. These films were taken from driver's education films. So I guess when you're getting your license, there are a few education films that are used, and also to create awareness about accidents. So these were the videos that were used. When the participants had watched the film, they were asked to give an account of the accident they had seen, and then they had to answer a questionnaire within which there was one very critical question. Okay? And each of the 5 groups received the critical question, but with 5 different verbs. Okay? And the researchers hypothesized that these verbs, which have varying intensities, okay, which is contacted, which is kind of like a slight touch of the 2 cars, then there's hit, bumped, collided, and smashed. Okay? So the varying intensity of these verbs they would then influence the estimation of speed that the participants made. Okay, so if you were in the contacted group, you would be asked about how fast were the cars going when they contacted each other. Okay, and if you're in the smashed group, you would be asked about how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. Okay, so again, this is an independent measures design. The participants were in different groups. Okay, they didn't receive the question again and again. And what the researchers did find was that there was, in fact, a significant difference in the estimation of speed. Okay, and these are the average estimations per group. So the participants in the contacted group, they suggested that the speed at which the cars were going was 31.8 miles per hour. Okay, this is not kilometers per hour, miles per hour. The one in the hit group was 34, bumped 38.1, collided 39.3, and smashed with the highest was at 40.8. This again then goes to suggest that leading verbs or leading questions can in fact distort or help, or rather result in the reconstruction of memory. Okay, or here in this case, the memory of how fast the cars were possibly moving. So the major issue with this procedure is that we don't really know whether there was actually a change in memory that happened due to the leading questions, or whether it was merely a response bias. Okay, a response bias would basically mean that if I am confused whether the car was at 30 miles per hour or 40 miles per hour, and then I just say, okay, it was probably 40 miles per hour, that is a response bias, because that is not very accurate and reliable. So is it possible that these averages were influenced more so by response bias and not actual memory change? Okay, memory change would mean that there was something that they saw, or they reported that they didn't see in the initial, or that didn't happen in the initial event. Okay, so that is basically the procedure of the first experiment that Loftus and Palmer conducted. So in response to this major conflict between whether it was truly a memory change or just merely a response bias, she conducted a second experiment. In the second experiment, she used a similar procedure, except for the fact that there were only 3 conditions. So in a second variation of the study, 150 students were randomly allocated to one of the 3 conditions that she chose. Participants were asked only one of 2 questions, either how fast the car were going when they smashed or when they hit each other. Okay? A third group, which was the control group, was not asked any leading question. Okay, the participants were asked to come back a week later, and then without re-watching the video, they were asked one of the following questions. Did you see any broken glass? Yes or no? Okay, so basically what happened was the leading question was asked right after they watched the video, and then a week later, they were asked if they saw any broken glass or not. Okay, and the results were that the probability of saying yes was 32% in the smash group and 14% in the hit group. So the higher intensity word actually led to higher speed estimates and recollecting an event that never actually occurred. So in the original video, there was actually no broken glass. So because of the intensity of the word smashed, participants were more likely to say yes, they saw broken glass, which was not really the case. Okay, and this second experiment then went on to answer the question of whether it was actual memory change or response bias, and in this case it was memory change or memory distortion. Okay, despite the further changes that they made and the extra experiment that they conducted in response to their initial concern about it being response bias or it actually being change in memory, Loftus and Palmer received a lot more criticism following the second experiment. A lot of it surrounded around the idea that it was not necessarily ecologically valid for several different reasons. The first being the post-event information and also the response of the participants were all verbal. Okay, so then you cannot really translate that to visual post-event information and how that affects memory, and also the whole idea that there can be visual storage of memory as well. Okay, and this is further understood by the idea that most eyewitness testimonies usually involve recognition rather than recall. So visual information might actually be more relevant or ecologically valid for eyewitness testimonies than verbal. Okay, at least at the very beginning of the case. So ecological validity is a major question. Even though these were experiments, that means that internal validity, which is control over variables, would be high and control over the environment is high. But the question is whether it can be transferred into real life situations. Okay, and we know that in real life, post-event information can be way more aggressive. It's not merely just asking leading questions which are phrased with different verbs. It can be conflicting testimonies that are used by the opposing lawyers. There's police interrogations which can be quite stressful, and we know that stress can affect memory. And then there's the biggest piece, which is lawyers tampering the evidence or the eyewitness. Okay, and this is very integral to our understanding of memory, and also how we, or rather lawyers and the court, conduct their proceedings, because the primary job or the primary aim of lawyers is to serve their clients and help them win their case at any cost. So there are a lot of lawyers who will try engaging in leading questions, and the others will object to that. So it is interesting, and it is also kind of common sense that eyewitness testimonies can be easily changed or distorted. Okay, so then again, Loftus, Miller, and Burns conducted further research to compensate for the drawbacks, especially with regards to visual post-event information and visual recall. So these are the major drawbacks, and I think another thing is that they were actually watching a video of a car crash and not an actual car crash. So maybe the emotional impact of it might not be as real or might not even be there. So can then again this research be applied or transferred to real life situations is the biggest problem.